So I met Dan at a good friend's home, my childhood friend. She introduced us. And we were friends first for quite a while. And my parents were stationed out in California at the time. And they had a fabulous backyard. And so we would have barbecues. And Dan, all of our friends would come over and Dan would be there and he would hang out with my dad. And he actually became good friends with my dad first. And my dad really liked him. So after that barbecue that Dan hung out with my dad, he ended up asking me out later that week. He asked me on our first date, and he was quite the gentleman, which I loved about him. And he picked me up and took us to a nice dinner. And halfway through dinner, I think, was when I knew that he was the guy for me. So in 2012, Dan was on deployment in Afghanistan. And it was a long deployment. It was 9 months. And so at the very end of month 6, going to the beginning of month 7, I received a phone call at 6:10 in the morning. And it was the phone call saying that Dan had been involved in an incident and that he was currently in surgery. And that was, life changed then. Dan was in a medically induced coma at the time and on a breathing tube. And he wasn't stable enough to be flown out of Afghanistan. So we waited for several days. And then there was a miracle, and Dan stabilized enough to be flown to Germany. And I think that Dan and I live our life knowing that he did come home, and others, those that we love, did not. Many over the years have not come home, and so it's very important to us to continue serving, to continue the mission and serving the American people in any way we can, and we owe it to them. And that's what we'll continue to do. So something that I greatly admire about Dan is his strength, no matter what is happening. When we were in the hospital, shortly after he'd been flown in from Germany, the doctors informed us that they didn't believe Dan would see again. For me, it was very difficult news to hear. And Dan was completely blind, and he reached out and said my name and took my hand, and he told me that everything was going to be okay. And he'd just been told that he would probably never see again. But he was incredibly strong for me. And he told me not to worry. Dan will always be that person. I've watched Dan have strong faith even during the hardest moments of our life. I've watched Dan give strength to others when times have been very difficult. And that is something I've always been incredibly proud of him for doing. When everything is crazy around you and you feel like the world's falling apart because the person you loved was just blown up by a bomb, he's the person to tell you it's going to be okay and not to worry. Even when he's the one that's been blown up, which I think is incredible. And I love that about him. Dan is incredibly driven. When he was told he would have to be medically retired from the military, this was, of course, a hard day. We thought Dan would be in the military for 20 years, and it ended up being 10 years. And the next day, he woke up and he told me that he was going to figure out a way to keep serving. And he was going to apply to the top policy schools. And he did, and he got into everyone that he applied to. And I was very proud of him for that. And he kept moving forward. He went to school. He received his master's. He worked very hard. He had excellent grades. And then he wanted to come home. Wanted to come home to Texas. And so when I met Dan, we were not in Texas. He was stationed in California. And I tell everyone this. When you meet a boy who's from Texas, outside of Texas, they tell you from the first day you meet them, they're going home to Texas. So I always knew that we were going to come home to Texas one day. And Texas boys, Dan in particular, he's special. He's a gentleman always. He's respectful and he's kind. And he will always listen to another point of view, the other side of the argument. He won't necessarily agree with you, but he will tell you why he disagrees with you in a nice way and in a respectful way. Dan is a policy nerd, and I find that incredibly attractive. He is someone that will research everything, talk to everyone he can about if they're an expert in the field. He won't come out with a policy without getting the research done, looking into it, seeing what the best option will be. He's very thoughtful. One of the reasons I fell in love with Dan is because he's the type of person where you never have to worry that he's saying one thing to your face and one thing when you're not in the room. Everything he would say, he says it to the person. It's been incredible because people have really responded to that, even when Dan's disagreeing with them. When we meet people at events or knocking on doors, they'll tell him, well, I don't agree with this, do you? Or I do agree with this, do you? And if he doesn't feel the same way as them, he'll tell them. He doesn't lie. And I really admire that because that's a hard position to be in when someone doesn't want to hear what you have to say or disagrees with what you have to say, but to still stand true to your beliefs, your values, and your opinions. And I think that is something that is needed in any profession, but especially in Congress.